Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all fandoms, welcome to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 121. I am the Indigenous Owl.
I'm the Younger Raccoon, and we are back for the first podcast of August.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the first podcast of August.
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
Yeah, July was kind of a bit of a slog, I would say anyway, because of the weather. And now we have a little bit more, crazy wind, I would say.
Definitely.
If you do hear a very loud cracking or falling noise, that'll probably be part of my fence, and the dogs will probably go crazy, so that might get picked up. So I'm just going to let you know what's happening, because we're kind of in the midst of a storm for the most part. It's nice though, but things kind of go a bit it's not good for recording, basically. No. Unfortunately. But for the first time, and I think a very, very, very long time, we have two people on a podcast, one after the other. So this is like...
Yeah, actually, it's true.
Yeah, as of this year.
Yeah, so that's good.
Which is fine. Everyone's busy. It's understandable. Thank you for coming on this podcast, Al.
No problem.
It is a pleasure to have you, especially on, yet again, another pretty big... and somewhat horror-filled podcast. I trust me, I don't intentionally structure these podcasts just to be, a fest of horror films and stuff like that. It just kind of happens, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, there was about 50 trailers that probably released this week, and we're not going to talk about all 50 of these trailers, simply put. No one is going to, and I don't think there is any podcast doing it. So... yeah, but how have you been over the last I can actually say, how have you been over the last fortnight and 2 weeks?
Oh, I've been alright. Not too much happening in my personal life. I've just been making money. That's all I can say about that. But in terms of things I've watched, so I went to the cinema on Tuesday to watch The Lion King.
Oh yeah.
But I do have some news, because it kind of links to the last podcast we just did, because basically... there's there's two trailers actually that links to a previous podcast as well. So there's when the trailers were playing, the first film trailer that actually came out was Playmobil. I was actually surprised to see that in the film trailer, because I was thinking, we spoke about that in podcast 104. So I was like, oh, okay, it's quite interesting to see that. I thought, yeah, it's worth mentioning in the podcast. And then the next film that I'm going to mention, I wish I had some drums for the drum rolls, but. No. Basically, the film The Cats.
Oh, they're already showing that.
They were showing it on the trailer. I was like, oh no.
Could you gauge the audience reaction to that?
Yeah, I could actually tell you. Basically, so when the film came on, I was like, oh no. My friend was like, oh, what's this? I was like, oh, it's The Cats. This film looks shit. This film actually looks really shit. She's like, oh, and we were just watching it. And then she was saying, oh, Idris Elba's in it. What's he gonna be? What's he gonna do? He's not a singer. I was just like, I don't know.
Which, really, to be fair, is a good point.
Yeah, I was like, well, what's gonna happen? I don't know. And then I can't remember exactly what scene it was, but the audience started laughing at a scene in particular. I think they were laughing at, the cats in particular. Like, why do the cats look like that? And then I heard someone say the cats look really creepy. So I was like, oh, well, I'm glad we're not the only ones with that opinion.
Yeah, I didn't really mention this on the last podcast, but yeah, the internet was kind of going crazy, making fun of it, saying it looked creepy, it looked weird, all this kind of stuff. Funny enough, the day the trailer came out, The Guardian, which is a British newspaper, actually put that on the front cover, saying this is going to be one of the weirdest films of the year. And they used an image of Judi Dench cat. And I was like, wow, that's a big deal that even a newspaper had to put that front page stating, this looks awful. I know they say bad press is good press, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah, it's actually true.
Because once again, I think I mentioned this on the podcast, keep in mind this film is going up against Star Wars Episode 9 and Jumanji 3.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have two good options there. The last Jumanji film was great, and everyone's going to go watch Star Wars, so... yeah.
But yeah, going back to Lion King anyway, so...
yeah.
The film itself, I didn't think that was actually that great. The reason why I say this is because, not the plot, because the plot's exactly the same, but in terms of the voice acting, I felt like it was really redundant from the characters. The only voice acting I would say was really good would be Mufasa. I think Beyonce did a really good job with Nala when she's older, and Danny Glover did a very good job with Simba, I feel like. And Seth Rogen did a very good job with Pumbaa as well. He got into character very well. But in terms of, I'm going to talk about Scar. I felt like, because it's not the same voice actor, I felt like, okay, I'm going to see, because, you know, I don't want to try and make a judgment and see if he's not going to do a good job, but I felt like the character, Scar himself, I felt like it was just, he was really, like, I don't know, it just was really boring and stale as a villain. Like, certain words he would say, I feel like it was really boring. Like, there's the certain part right at the beginning where Scar is introduced with the mouse. It's like, in the cartoon, I feel like when he says, like, to Zazu, "You've made me lose my lunch," he says it in a kind of jokey way, I feel like, but in the movie, he's kind of like, "Oh, you made me lose my lunch." It's just kind of like, Scar, you just seem really bored. Like, you just don't want to be here. I just felt like
antidepressants.
Yeah, it felt like that. It really did, and I was just like, oh.
Especially as a comparison compared to the original voice acting.
Yeah, he just didn't seem as, like, sinister and up to something in the actual movie. He just seemed really bored. And stale, actually. And Mufasa, a lot of, actually, in terms, not my opinion exactly, but I looked at some other people's opinions of Mufasa's voice acting, which I was actually quite shocked to hear. They were like, oh yeah, like, the voice actor he did this time around isn't as good as his 94 performance of Mufasa. And I was just like, I don't know, but it's still, at least we still kept the same voice actor. It's not like they changed his voice completely.
Yeah, it's James Earl Jones still, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's like one of the only people still, reprising his role, I should say.
Yeah, so it's weird. Just like, no, I feel like let's be grateful that he actually did the role for it again. So, and I feel like as well, in terms of like the remake, I feel like Jungle Book was way better executed.
I think out of the live action remakes, I think that's the better one.
Yeah, I feel like Jungle Book back in 2016 did a really good job. I didn't even watch the original animation of Jungle Book first before the film. But I watched the live action and I understood the story, and then watching, actually on the same night, I actually went home and watched the original version of Jungle Book, and I actually felt like, yeah, the live action version did a really good job in explaining the story. It was very clear. But I felt like with The Lion King, it missed out a lot of things from the original, I felt like, even in terms of the characters and the script writing as well. The script wasn't exactly the same, even though I know you're not expecting it to be the same because it is a remake, but the script just seemed a bit dull as well. And even Beauty and the Beast that came out, I think it was like 2017, did a really good job. I felt like the animation was great, storyline obviously the same, but yeah, I felt like it was just better. That's pretty much all I've got to say on that.
I think it's because they don't really need to. I mean, it's one of their most celebrated films. People aren't really... But they must have probably assumed that people aren't really going to care. People are going to go, oh, look how good the special effects are.
Yeah.
You know, look how good animation has got. That's why I think it's not really 2D animation. It's CGI. It's a whole nother beast. But yeah, I've heard lots of things about this film. Lots of people being salty. But it's still one of the most successful films of this year, unfortunately. And for those of you people who keep complaining about those Disney live actions, stop watching them. Simply put, because there's the same people who say, "Oh, I hate these live action remakes," still go and watch them. So
it's actually true.
Yeah, I'm not saying everyone, because there's plenty of reviewers on the internet and elsewhere who do not watch them. I know of. I can give you plenty of examples of those who just don't bother watching them. But yeah, you're kind of part of the problem. But I know they're not going to stop until they get like a real big flop. We got so many of these live actions coming up. I know we got the Little Mermaid one, which everyone got upset about because a singer is going to be like Ariel. And I was just like, I've never heard of this woman, so oh well. And then you got the Mulan film, which that's going to be a big deal. I specifically didn't talk about that film because I have too much to say about that film. And you're probably wondering, oh, how can you have a lot to say about just a trailer? And I was like, if you knew why this film was actually being remade, you would understand. And I think they may have just said they're going to do like a live action version of like The Great Mouse Detective.
Oh, right, okay.
Which is like, oh, so you're scraping the barrel now. Not to say that film was bad. The film was not bad. I'm just saying like, you've done all the iconic ones.
Right.
Now you're going to the ones that everyone's forgotten about. Like you're that desperate. To which I'm like, really, The Great Mouse Detective? How are you going to adapt that? Because there's technically a burlesque dancer in that, and there's murder in it.
Thing is, as well, with Lion King as well, I originally, when I first saw the trailer come out, I was like, yeah, I'm excited. But then when I saw the release of Pumbaa, I was like, they done him dirty. I was like, I don't want to watch it. But unfortunately, because my friend wanted to watch it, I just kind of went along to see it with her because I knew she wanted someone to see it with. So I thought, I'll go and see. But yeah, that's my actual opinion of it anyway.
Fair enough.
And the last thing that I'm going to mention is yesterday I went to the manga exhibition at the British Museum.
Oh, good, yeah.
I actually was kind of disappointed by it.
Really?
Yeah, surprisingly, I thought I was gonna enjoy it, but I don't know. I felt like there's certain things I did like to see, like the actual original manga stuff, the actual comics and stuff, but the actual exhibit itself, I felt like it was just too. I don't know, like it was just. The sections were too small, I felt like, especially for JoJo. I was like, because I started watching JoJo, I've got like this obsession with it now. So I was like, oh, where's the JoJo at? Where's the JoJo? And then when I saw it, I was like, oh. Okay.
But you have to keep in mind, like, manga and anime as like an art form, it's so big, it could have taken up the whole of like the British Museum, and you probably still would have gone, that's disappointing. You know what I mean? You could have had a whole building dedicated and you still would have gone... Because you have to keep in mind, this is more as a introductory, educational kind of thing. I mean, there should really be, like... I mean, obviously we went to see... And there are going to be more exhibitions regarding, like, artists and certain series.
Yeah.
If we do get a JoJo exhibition, that's going to be amazing because you're going to get a whole room or a whole building dedicated to that.
Even the exhibition we went to 2 weeks ago, I really enjoyed it. I didn't know much of the artist, but I actually felt more inspired. Whereas this exhibition, I didn't feel as inspired.
It was, for me, I know a lot about Japanese animation. A lot of people do not. And I remember when I went there, when I was coming out and I was taking my last few like photos and videos, I remember there was a kid who kind of walked in. And obviously when you go there, there's this great mural which kind of has an introduction and it has imagery to Alice in Wonderland. Yeah. And I know there was a kid going, why is Alice in Wonderland here? That has nothing to do with anime. That shouldn't be here. And I was like, well, kid, if you read, you'd know. Like, I understand they're trying to give like an overview of the history in the making because not everyone knows. Your favorite anime might be Naruto, but most people don't even know it was based on print. Most people don't even know who made it. Yeah. So I think it's more the case of this is an overview of the whole history. Manga is, so that's what it is. If it was like a, once again, like a JoJo manga, obviously I don't necessarily want to know the origins of JoJo. I want to see more of JoJo. I want to see more of the art. I want to see more of this. Then I'd be disappointed. But for what it was, I did enjoy it. I will say though as well, if you were disappointed by it, get the book on the exhibition that the British Library has actually printed. That's a thick, like 300-page book that actually goes into way more detail, not just about everything they show off there, but the whole manga industry as a whole. Oh, wow. Like, there is sections, there is a lot more greater detail given to certain series, certain artists, certain practices, certain people, certain, like JoJo in that book. So, great. I would recommend that if you were disappointed, and to anyone else just in general, because I think given the book, that is a very heavy, comprehensive, like deep dive look into the art form. So I'd recommend that as well.
But I am grateful that they did actually an exhibition dedicated to manga anyway. So
same here. I was about to say something I probably shouldn't. Not anything bad, but it was like, let's not go down that rabbit hole. I guess I only managed to get 2 things done this week. The first thing I want to talk about is I watched all 5 seasons of the show that's bizarrely just called Mickey Mouse. Okay. It's a collection of like shorts that they show on Disney Channel and they're up on YouTube. So I watched all of those episodes. They're like 3 minutes long for the most part. And it's a really funny series, honestly. Obviously there's lots of commentary you can make about Disney and all that kind of stuff, but what the series is fantastic. It basically takes the old and the new with, I guess, animation and Disney and Mickey Mouse, and it kind of combines them into its own kind of original thing, where it's essentially Mickey Mouse and friends on a bunch of adventures, and can be about literally about anything. And it's a really strong series because what they've done with the character of Mickey Mouse is he's a lot more like selfless. Like, he will do whatever it takes, and I mean literally anything, to like either impress Minnie or save someone's life, basically. Like, there's one episode where, for example, like the building Minnie is in is on fire, and he literally goes to every house telling people the building's on fire and gets them out of there before going to save Minnie. So that's the kind of character he is. But at the same time, there's some great funny stuff they do with his character. Like, there's one episode where Mickey Mouse doesn't want a surprise birthday party because every time his friends have surprised him, it's either led to him being injured or scared to death or paralyzed. Oh, wow. So he literally says, how about this year? How about we don't have a surprise party? And there's literally a point where obviously his friends just cannot help it. And they're like, we've got to do a surprise party. Yeah. And he notices no one's around and he starts freaking out. Because he literally goes, they're paralyzing the fear. It's coming. Yeah. There are some great stuff. And some great episodes in there, and the animation is fantastic. There's a great use of 3D animation in it. The voice acting is great as well. I also love the fact that every now and then you get an episode that takes place in another country, where you have the voice actor actually speaking that native country, and it's mostly silent for the most part, but like they'll be in like Russia or Japan or Brazil or India, you know, and they'll just be doing something that's very like culturally appropriate, which is really interesting. So it's nice that they're kind of really expanding Mickey Mouse as a whole and the stuff in that. But and it's a very funny written show as well. There's a lot of really great jokes that do catch you off guard. Like for example, if you really want to see Mickey Mouse essentially smother a mobile phone to death, you should watch that series, because there is literally a scene where he holds a pillow over a mobile phone until it stops breathing. And I'm like, oh, this is in a children's cartoon. Yeah, that happens because they can just get away with that kind of stuff, because I don't think Disney's watching this show. Yeah, they've made quite a few interesting references in the series where it's like, oh, I didn't know you could get away with that. Like, I cannot think of examples, but there are a lot of references to Disney films, which they kind of just go, yeah, you screw that rubbish to some extent. And yeah, there are some like familiar characters do appear, like Donald Duck's in there, Goofy's in there. You also see Scrooge McDuck as well, which is great. He bizarrely asks Mickey Mouse if he can borrow $5, which is like, hold on a second, I thought you were a millionaire. But yeah, there's some really funny writing in that series, and I would highly recommend it. It wouldn't take you that long to watch the series, but yeah, really strong. The other thing I want to talk about is a 2001 horror anthology series I watched, because you know I love my anthologies, called Night Visions, and I hadn't heard about this series, and the main reason I hadn't heard about it is because this series was airing just before September the 11th, and they basically stopped showing it for a year and then continued showing it like a year later. So the show was like kind of cursed. Fun fact, a lot of media from 2001 to 2002 is lost simply because of that incident where networks decided, how about we just don't show that for whatever reason. It also doesn't help that the very first episode of Night Visions revolves around a plane crash. So that's obviously they didn't know the episode was filmed and made, and it was literally shown in February of that year. So obviously they didn't know, so I understand that. But this series is really interesting and has some great concepts to it. It's not necessarily like an all-out horror show, like there's not too much violence, because some of the concepts are somewhat sci-fi as well sometimes. Like there's one episode where like some guy is called in from the military to kind of sort out the situation where like there's this flat, like this, how do you explain it? There's like this cube in the middle of nowhere that kind of shows just a house somewhere, and they can't access it and the people inside can't see it, and that's how the whole episode is figuring out what the hell this is. And there are other great episodes that kind of do focus on interesting like content. Let me bring up the episode list. Don't worry, I'm not gonna go through every episode and that, but there are some great episodes which, well, there's also some dumb episodes as well where you're just like they hint or they make the twist way too obvious.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, there's a few cases where they will like constantly be hinting at this, and like for example, there's a lot of episodes where you only ever really see 3 characters. You see the main character, a supporting character, and a character that just appears once and then disappears, and then some weird stuff starts happening, and then you're like, oh, I wonder who's doing the weird stuff.
Right, okay.
It's that kind of stuff. You see it in episodes like Quiet Please, where it's a guy who just wants a bit of peace and quiet, and it's very obvious as to what's going on, because the episode keeps constantly referencing that there is a serial killer who is cutting out people's tongues. I wonder who the serial killer is.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. But then there are some great episodes like Afterlife as well, where it takes place during a husband's funeral, and they're at the funeral, and then the daughter is like literally doing a speech, and all of a sudden the dad just gets out of his coffin. He's just alive now.
Oh, whoa. And
so the whole episode deals with what exactly happened, because things start getting really interesting where the dad is very pessimistic about almost everything, and he's just like, he's literally going, I don't see what the point is being alive when everyone's just gonna die. And he kind of seems to keep going on about where he was.
Right. And
that kind of drives him to do something, not to spoil too much for the most part. But you do get some really interesting episodes and some really interesting concepts. It's not the greatest show ever. The host of the series who is uncredited, weirdly enough, is Henry Rollins, who is who was a lead singer and in the band Black Flag, one of the most famous punk bands of all time, and I'm surprised he's not credited. But he is very weird in this series, because usually when you're doing, let's say, anything that's horror filled, you expect someone to come out and be a bit more acting, having a bit more like kind of make things creepier, that kind of stuff. Knowing Henry Rollins, he just walks out in his black shirt with his arms out and just basically says, like, this character is about to find out he's gonna die. And then he plays the episode. And even at the end, it's just like, he just comes out and he's like, just gives like a message, like a 2-word message where he's like, there's literally one time where he's just like, yeah, maybe sometimes you should keep your mouth shut or someone will shut it for you. And that's it, on to the next episode.
Oh, wow.
So he's very blunt, which is fine, I guess. But obviously I don't think that was really their intent for the most part. Because he just walks out like, yeah, here's the episode.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
Yeah, it is funny. And I'm surprised not a lot of people know that he's in it, but I want to let people know he's in it. The only other episode I will mention real quick is there's a great episode called Darkness, which essentially revolves around a guy inheriting his grandfather's house.
Right.
Which is constantly illuminated because his grandfather was terribly afraid of the dark.
Right.
And that's a really interesting concept because, there's something in the house. And it is an interesting concept because the townspeople are like, yeah, so you're going to give that house back, right? And he's like, no, why would I give the house back? And what happens with the characters and what's going on is pretty interesting. So there's great concepts like that. And I like the idea of a whole mansion being filled with just lights everywhere.
Yeah.
And literally freaking out when one light is about to go out. So there's some great stuff, and I think it's worth watching. It's not perfect, and the only other thing I will say is one of the writers was one of the writers for the Goosebumps TV series as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this is basically what he did after.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah, and he basically essentially crafted some pretty cool stories, so I will give him that. But let's move on to the rest of the podcast for the most part, because we had a very fulfilled last 2 weeks, both of us. And the first story we're going to talk about is obviously a bit of a sensitive subject, and it kind of revolves around the 2 mass shootings that happened in America over the last few days, which has obviously caused a lot of controversy, a lot of screaming, and essentially we want to talk about this whole situation where essentially once again the government has come out and essentially said, yeah, it must be video games. Violent video games are the cause of all problems, apparently. And in light of that, essentially Walmart has basically been trying to kind of like censor and remove all reference and all advertising or like images to do with violent video games in their stores. Okay. Yeah, they kind of sent messages around to their employees, kind of something on the lines of like saying to staff to remove displays that contain like violent images or aggressive behavior.
Right.
You know, to essentially turn off like the display tablets displaying like violent video games, cancel any like events revolving like first person shooter games, as well as any visuals or references to violence in films as well. Which is interesting because, as most people have pointed out and a lot of people will say, when you're an international brand like Walmart, who still sells guns in your store, yes, Walmarts do sell guns that you can just buy. Obviously, you'll need ID and other things, but there's guns just in Walmart. It's very hypocritical to be essentially saying, we gotta ban these violent video games. They're causing people to kill people. Would you like to buy a gun, sir? And you also got to keep in mind as well that you're selling these so-called violent video games in your store. You won't remove them. You're just removing any reference to them. Yet you'll still sell them. That's extra hypocritical, in my opinion. It's like you're essentially part of the problem. You know, you're trying to save face by going, oh, yeah, because for those of you who don't know, these 2 mass shootings happened in Walmart shops.
Oh, God.
Yes, they happened in Walmart shops, one of them being in Mexico.
Oh.
You would think after that you would go, you know what, maybe let's remove the guns in our shop because that maybe doesn't look good on our image that a good few people got killed with guns and we sell guns. maybe we should stop that, or at least think about, no,
Yeah.
it must be video games. If we stop people looking at the video games, there will be no crime in the world, simply put. It's so weird, I find.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially continuing the problem, basically. Which I understand, because it's so weird, because you're so greedy that you won't stop selling guns and video games. You will just continue to keep selling them, despite the fact that, like, I'm not trying to say that all guns are bought from Walmart or other things, or that only crimes that happen with guns or crimes are incredibly bad, or that kind of stuff. But it's just so hypocritical for them to be essentially being so hard on, like, oh, it's video games. Oh, I've got to make sure the kids don't play the video games. That's why they're shooting it. And it's like, given what the current president of America has said about a certain race, and given that a certain said race was essentially attacked with guns in their own country, how can you be saying it was video games?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And even then, what even counts as a violent video game? Does a cartoony platformer that has you hitting someone with a bat count as violent video games? You know, does the WWE wrestling games count as violent video games? Yeah, they're beating up each other and they're bleeding, but wrestling's fake, and so is this game. Does that count? It's like, what about sports games? What about when NFL, when they're tackling each other to the ground and hurting each other? Does that count as violent? Or are you allowed to sell that game? You got to be a bit more specific with this stuff. You know, that's why when you just literally put a stamp going, all games bad, it's just, you know, it's just people trying to save face and just trying to, you know, I'm not even going to get into that because that's a whole other situation.
Podcast. I don't know. Side podcast for that.
Side podcast. Raccoon talks about why America's the worst country in the world.
Oof.
Oh, people would love that. Or they shut me down knowing YouTube of recently, where they're just like, yeah, you're talking about this, gotta shut you down. Yeah, YouTube is another hypocritical one where they're like, hey, you're talking politics. Oh, you're talking about the politics we don't like. You need to stop that now. Yes, it's a interesting time for the most part. But I wanted to bring that up because that's absolutely ridiculous. How can you be so hypocritical? How can you be so hypocritical? But moving on, we'll have some slightly more positive things to talk about, and that's essentially an update on Kyoto Animation Studio.
Yes.
So for those of you who didn't listen to the last podcast, or don't know, essentially on the 18th of July, there was an arson attack against the animation studio in Japan, Kyoto Animation, which unfortunately resulted in, unfortunately, as of time of recording, 35 people unfortunately passing away because of the incident. There have been some positives in the light of this situation happening in the form of continued donations, which people have sent from within Japan and from outside as well. Studio One's digital data, which was in the building, is recoverable, which is a good thing, which means a lot of what they were working on, like their current projects and that, have essentially survived, so they'll be able to continue from where they were left off, and they weren't left with absolutely nothing. Yeah. So that's a really good thing to hear about as well. Also, there is a proposal of a tax break from the donations that have come through, which essentially that will mean that given the situation, the tax that essentially the studio would have to pay will essentially be reduced in a way that obviously they have more time to essentially, you know, pay the general tax as well, but having a lot less tax to pay, obviously, given such situations happen, as well as that money that will come of the reduced tax as well as donations will hopefully go to family and friends and people who have been affected. So that's obviously a really good thing to hear about as well. Was there anything else you wanted to say, Al?
As well, on the same day, I think it was the 29th, where the data was retrieved, the actual president of the Kyoto Animation, Hideaki Hata, made a heartwarming speech about how the studio will continue to make more projects and help people with their hopes and dreams, and being thankful for like the fans' supports and on using his quote hearts and prayers. So it's really nice to see that actually they're going to continue forward with this, with the projects and stuff like that.
Yes, and they should. I mean, as horrible as what has happened, it's always good to like keep positive and like keep going as well. Even in the light of this stuff, I do like kind of towards the end where he kind of talks about how like, you know, we will not vanish without a fight, which is kind of a nice way of kind of how he ends the statement off. We will put all the information as well as the quote in English translation in the description and the download link, so you can obviously read that and get the facts. Much like with every podcast, that will all be there. So that's kind of like a few things we wanted to talk about. I know they weren't the most pleasant things, but I think they are quite important. Moving on, we're actually going to talk about a game for once on this podcast. And that is going to be Blair Witch, which is kind of hard for me to say without saying the project, because when I say Blair Witch, I'm reminded of the awful 2006 film, which didn't do anything. But essentially, to kind of get people caught up in case you're maybe wondering what the hell this is, the Blair Witch Project was a film that released back in 1999. It was it's kind of held as one of the first kind of like found footage, you know, shaky cam horror films, despite the fact it was technically the second. There was a film that technically beat it, but this was the film that really pushed it into stardom for the most part. It was a massive success at the time. I think as of right now, it's technically the second most successful film based on an original idea of all time, next to Get Out being the most number one, basically. Right. So if you ever want a that's a counter argument to how original ideas don't actually make money, because that film was made on a budget of like what, £6,000 or something like that, and it made like 246 million. So, and also I think the Blair Witch Project also inspired a lot of video games of the modern time as well. You look at games like Slender and Outlast, and you can clearly see that they watched the Blair Witch Project, almost inspired by it. There was a sequel that came out a year later, funny enough, which was terrible. And then you had the 2016 film, which was awful, which no one knows what's going on in that film, because they just kind of messed it up. And I think, as I was telling you on the podcast, they were very snaky about that film, where they didn't tell anyone that they were making this film until it was too late. They called it quote unquote The Forest at Comic-Con, and then they just out of nowhere just went, yeah, it's Blair Witch. Which if you have to hide things from people, that's not really a good sign, especially if it's your own film. But then again, they knew people weren't gonna like this. And so here we are. We have Blair Witch on, I think, PC. And no matter the way you look at this film should have been released about a decade ago at least. It should have been on PS2 along with The Thing video game and a lot of other video games that were based on horror films or films at the time. So you're a bit late to the party for the most part. And even if you want to go, oh, well, they're doing it on like the 2016 film, that's still 3 years ago. You should have released this on the day and made it more relevant to that film, because things are now all confusing now, because this is called The Blair Witch, much like the third film, which is just called The Blair Witch, which also has nothing to do with The Blair Witch, in my opinion. This film seems to have more to do with the first film, despite the fact it taking place in 1996, before the events of the film. Which, fine, if you want to do a prequel, that's fine. You know, that's, you know, the world is your oyster. But at the same time, it's like, it does contradict a lot of things to do with the films, because now it's like, oh, if they knew a kid went missing in this forest, why was that not brought up in the film? This supposed kid going missing was not brought up in the film. People going missing and the legend of the Blair Witch was brought up in the film, but not specifically this child.
Oh, wow, okay.
So already that's like, okay. And secondly, I had to do some more research watching some gameplay on this. Those little demon alien things that are running around at super speed, which only appear in the 2016 film, not any of the other two films. According to the creators, those are the witch's minions.
Oh.
So that's basically confirmed that the witch is a thing, which contradicts the other two films where you never see anything. You don't see a witch or a woman or anything in the first two films. So now that there's demons running around, just confirm. Oh yeah, so she must be a real thing. She can combine. She can summon demons. Yeah. So all the mystery gone from those two films. So well done, guys. And they tried to cover it up by saying, oh, the witch she's like an abstract concept. She's not really something that can take a form. She can take many forms. Even so, why do these minions all look the same? Why don't they look different? Why does she keep using the same stick figures and the same rock piles and the same things we've seen for the last 20 years, given the films, all three films? If she's that omniscient or whatever, why does she keep doing the same things? Already this film is a mess, and I haven't even talked about the gameplay.
Another podcast for that.
A podcast special, Blair Witch game, why it's bad. I really don't get what this game is. And I know you say, oh, it's a first-person game. No. I don't get what this game is trying to be. Is it trying to bank off the success of the original game or the sequels? Because it has nothing to do with them. Because if it's the first film, there weren't no demons running around in the first film.
Right, yeah.
And also it's 1986, camcorders weren't that available. I mean, it's a big deal that even in 1999 they have camcorders like that. But Howie's, I don't know. If you're in a search and rescue team, you wouldn't be carrying a camcorder, simply put.
Wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. You have a walkie-talkie and you might have a dog, yes. But you will not be going, oh, get my camcorder out, take pictures. No. Because that's a big deal. You couldn't afford to give every single person in the search party a camera, let alone let them split up.
Yeah.
Okay, a child just gone missing and there's a legend that people die in this forest. And if you go by the fake documentary that was made before the film came out, hundreds of people have gone missing. Why would you split up?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand this. But let's talk about the gameplay itself. You essentially walk around and you have a dog. So now let's move on, because that's all the gameplay is. But the one thing I don't get, and I have to be blunt with this, is your dog, which is called Bullet, that dog is clearly going to die, unfortunately. Or that dog simply cannot fight that minion running around at super speed. Yes, they've said that, oh yeah, you use the flashlight to slow them down, to which is like, oh, so you can't kill them then. Great. Good to know I'm powerless in this situation. Despite the fact I have a dog, but okay.
It sounds like Alone in the Dark, the PS1 game.
It's another game it ripped off then. Or Alan Wake as well. Because you literally use your torch to slow down the enemies and kill them. But you don't really kill them in this game, I don't think. That dog's clearly going to die. So I don't understand why you're going to introduce a mechanic that will probably be forgotten about, at least by the end of the game. Because when that dog dies or gets possessed or whatever, you're on your own. You just have a torch. And I'll be very surprised if that dog doesn't die, because it's a horror film. Obviously, if I was the witch, I would want to kill the thing that can sniff out the things I can do, simply put. Dogs are always the first to die, unfortunately, in horror films next to black people.
It's actually true.
It is true. They're usually the first or the second to die in any horror film. It's because dogs know. Let me give you guys a fun fact. Now, I'm not really a suspicious kind of person. If you're moving into a new house and you're going into a building and your dog physically will not go inside of it, that's a bad sign. Do not move into that house. I don't think dogs can technically sense evil or ghosts or that, but they can sense something. And I'm not, whatever they're sensing is, they're obviously sensing something that is so whatever that they will not follow you into a house. That's not a good sign.
Yeah.
But yeah, it should be the same thing with this dog. But I did see gameplay, and there is points where the dog will not go a certain point, and you can kind of comfort the dogs, and that's fine. Even there's a point where you're fighting the ghost, and you can even say to the dog, "Oh, stay close to me." That's fine. That works. It's a little bit more thought out. But I still kind of think about this, and I'm like, really, guys? This is kind of the game that your favorite YouTuber is going to make one video about and then not talk about ever again. And I just kind of figured, given all the points I've made with the confusion and all that, I'm like, oh, really? I've talked a bit too much about this trailer. I think you had some stuff you wanted to say, but didn't you?
Yeah, I actually did want to add on. Basically, I watched a the gameplay trailer as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I had a look at the comments because I thought, let me just see, just out of curiosity. And what actually on the contrary of what you said about the dog, someone actually mentioned if the witch kills the dog, the witch is going to be scared of me. And then there was another person that said, if someone kills the dog, John Wick is going to teach them a lesson. I was just like, oh my god.
Yeah,
I mean, that's funny.
It makes sense. But I mean, I was just looking at this game and I was just so angry that they're like still trying to do something with the Blair Witch Project. And it's like, how about we just let it go? I mean, you tried to do a sequel and that failed. You tried to do another sequel, which was basically a remake, although they won't tell you that. And it failed.
Oh god. And
now they're trying to do a game like how many years later, and it's like, and given how many jump scary games there are, it's like, really?
Yeah.
Really? You couldn't, like, this is the same people who, I forget what the game they made. I think they made Layers of Fear, which is already not a good game anyway. It's just kind of like a very, you walk around and something scary happens in your face. It's like,
yeah.
So I'm really disappointed in this game. It won't be anything special, but I just really wanted to rant on about like why this is like such a bad idea, or why. Anyway, I think we should move on to trailers, which I think you have the first trailer we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. So the film Lighthouse. It is a psychological horror film directed by Robert Eggers and written by him and his brother Max Eggers. Robert Eggers was known for his best film released in 2015, The Witch.
Oh yeah.
And basically the story is about two lighthouse keepers on a mysterious remote island set in New England. And this film is, I think it's set in 1890s. And the film the keepers are in solitude, and they start losing their sanity, and then they start getting threatened by their own worst nightmares. So my opinion on the trailer, I actually admired the whole film being black and white. It's really fitting to the actual era it's set in. It actually reminds me of one of the films, a film I watched back in university for a project that I was doing called Dead Man, that was released in '95 with Johnny Depp. It really gives that, it just kind of gives up the whole old setting, because Dead Man was also a film in black and white as well, so it kind of just reminded me of that. Dead Man's a really good film. I'd recommend people to watch that actually. And also, I was actually quite shocked to see Robert Pattinson, actually. I felt like his performance for the character was really good. Yeah,
Robert Pattinson has, he's been definitely climbing the ranks, because, he was in the film, I think came out, I can't remember the exact year, Good Time.
Right.
And that's a very, very, very good film, and he's, like, the main lead. I think it came out in, like, 2017, but regardless, it was, like, the best film of that year. And it's a very simple plot where it's, like, him and his brother essentially rob some place, and the events after that, things just keep getting worse and worse and worse, and it's like one of the more tense thrillers you've ever seen in your life. And it's like his performance in it is fantastic, and he's also going to be like the new Batman now as well. So,
I saw that actually. Yeah.
So I'm really happy for him to be in this, and even just these few clips we see, he definitely seems to be fitting the role. He's got that like badass mustache as well, and he's just like, you know, he's got the accent on point, which is great. And I mean, even Willem Dafoe as well, he looks exactly like a sea captain of the era. Like, you could almost mistake him. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, Robert Eggers has most likely looked at, like, tons of photos of how people looked back in the day, and just, like, I know this sounds weird, like, just finally crafted his beard to look exactly like that. But yeah, going on what you were saying, like, you know, the fact that it's in black and white is really appropriate for capturing the time period. And I mean, even like the aspect ratio being like, I don't know the exact aspect ratio, but it seems like it might have been of the time, how films might have been presented as the time, because it's like more squared, and to some extent how raw it looks makes it look more cinematic to me in some sense.
It gives off that like eerie feel.
Yeah, big time, because you look at a lot of the lighting in the film, and it's like, it's very well done, where there's points where there's like such harsh lighting and you almost can't even see anything. Yeah. And then there's points where like things are very like clear, but there's, you know, one thing that's worth noting about this film is this film was all shot on location.
Oh wow.
The lighthouse and that island, the whole film was shot there.
That's good. That's really good.
So when you see that fantastic shot of them standing out in the storm, that was just them filming because it so happened to be storming.
Oh, that's great.
That was not like studio or nothing. I mean, granted, with some of the shots they may have had to, do whatever, but I would imagine Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson's performance was most likely all done there, which is insane when you think about it. I mean, given all the things you've said, the psychological horror and the fact that it really has a really creepy kind of feel to it, and you really don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
I think really adds to it, because the trailer, although you've, read out the general synopsis of the film, we still don't know what the hell was going on until what is even going to happen, because some of the stuff we see in it, you're like, what? Like, it's clear that this Robert Pattinson's character has something to do with a mermaid, because he has like the little statue, and then you and then you see like that really creepy shot of like the fin of the tail of a mermaid in the water, and you're like, okay, is that real? Is he seeing that as a nightmare? Is that his memory? And that's another thing as well to keep in mind. It's like, is he here because he's like in love with the mermaid, or is he scared of it? Yeah. Because mermaids are monsters. They kill men, basically. Like, or what's going on there. And even then, we don't even necessarily know what Willem Dafoe's character is like scared of. We don't really. Nothing apparent seems to come through from that. Like, we haven't seen anything like, what's going on. But he definitely, both of them seem like paranoid as hell. Yeah, it's actually true. Like that really horrible scene of him like looking through like that little crack at him, and he's like, I forget what he says. He says, oh yeah, why just spill your beans? Yeah. And it's like, and that keeps getting repeated. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what is he talking about? Is he literally talking about, why did you tell me your secrets? Or like, did you literally spill like beans? Yeah. Like, it's really, that's another thing as well. I really feel like this film is already quotable. Yeah. Like, I don't know why. I've just been quoting this film like for the last 2 weeks. It's been walking around going, why just spill your beans? And stuff like that. And hiding secrets, are you? Yeah. I definitely want to see this film when it comes out. I hope it gets a release over here. I really do. I believe America's getting it in, I think, even October or something like that. Oh, okay. But I'm really looking forward to this film. It's one of my more anticipated films of this year. From what I've heard from people who have actually seen it, they've said that the trailer doesn't actually spoil anything. So it doesn't. Good. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it spoils anything. Which is amazing, because even then, like, even just looking at a lot of the scenes, it's like you had that really odd shot where you see like Robert Pattinson's character looking at like him through like a door crack, and then he's gone the next second, and I'm like, okay, hold on, is like I can't even make sense of it. I'm trying to like make sense of it on this podcast, and I can't do it here. And then you literally see like there's one scene where they're like, I don't know, literally being very suspicious of each other, and then they're like drinking merrily and dancing and all that, and then they're strangling each other, and then they're hugging it out, and you're like, what is going on? Yeah, it's like, man, it's all delusional. Who knows what's going on, but I cannot wait for this film. It's my most anticipated film of this year. It'll probably be the third film I see this year. Yeah, I've only seen 3. I've only seen 2 films in cinema this year. Oh my god! Yeah. It was like Us and like The Favourite, and that's it. Oh wow! I haven't been interested in anything at all, or it just hasn't come out film for me. I've got some newer films that I'm looking forward to, but some of it I just haven't bothered with the cinema, honestly. But that's just me. Let's move on to the next trailer, which kind of stays within that horror aspect, and that's going to be Little Monsters. And this is, it's kind of weird. It's like a Australian, American, and British comedy. And essentially the main plot is you have essentially Lupita Nyong'o. People say it differently, so I get confused. Yeah. And she is essentially looking after a group of small school children during essentially a zombie outbreak, which I think is a fantastic concept, even for like a zombie story, because zombies are getting, well, not getting, they are, it's boring now, essentially. And the way they're doing it, I think, is actually making it interesting, the way I see it, because one thing I absolutely love about this film, and it's kind of a tiny detail, which I guess a lot of people might not have noticed, is she really is trying to keep these kids calm. She's explaining the situation in a comedic sense, but in a way that they would understand it. Like, I think she says like, oh, it's like a game of It, except like those funny looking people are it, and you mustn't let them get you. You know, a kid would understand that, oh yeah, don't go near that guy. And also the fact that she obviously really cares for these kids. Like, you know, she's doing whatever it takes to like shield these kids from the horror, which I think is an interesting concept, as opposed to, because it could create some interesting tension, because you're like, oh, what's going to happen? You know, is the zombie going to try and attack the kids? Like, is she going to like fight back? You know, what's going to happen? You know, compared to like if it was just a film where it's like children killing zombies for an hour, which would get very boring very quickly. But what were your general thoughts on this trailer though, as well, or this film, I should say?
Literally, when I first saw the name of it, I was like, oh, is this like an animation? I was like, nah, okay, maybe not an animation. So then I watched like the first 2 seconds of it, and I was like, okay, Lupita Nyong'o is in it. I was thinking, okay, Peele's doing another project, isn't it? And then after I was like, oh, it's zombies. Oh, okay. To be honest, I wasn't too interested in the trailer, to be fair.
Okay.
I did think the acting was great, but I wasn't like something I'd be like, I wasn't hyped up for it or anything like that. It was just
I'm looking forward to it. I hope that the film was a lot, because I feel like we only really get like snippets of some of maybe the better scenes. Like, I think there's one scene where like she kind of like has the kids like going through like, because I think it takes place on a farm.
Yeah,
in Australia,
like it, yeah.
And she kind of has them like, you know, kind of, you know, in a line, like blindfolded, like passing the zombies, and I'm like, that looks like it could be a really funny scene, because it's like they're singing at the same time, you know, and there's like, you know, and I like that the kids aren't just there to be cute for the most part, or they don't seem like annoying, you know, because sometimes they try and write kids as being like annoying or like smart asses. They generally seem like genuine kids. And it seems like maybe at some point you're gonna have the kids maybe doing something. I know there's a point where like there's a zombie trying to get on the train, the kid's like hitting it as if that's gonna do anything, which I kind of thought was pretty funny. And also like Josh Gad's in it as well. For those of you who don't know, he voices Arlo in Frozen, so it's quite funny to see him in there as well, because he's quite an underrated actor. Most people know him for that and the Book of Mormon, but it is interesting to see him in the line. I do like the line where she's kind of Lupita's like knocking on the window, and she's like, "Oh, I've got kids, you need to listen." He's like, "Oh, great, I don't give a fuck."
yeah.
Which is understandable. In a lot of cases, most people would not be opening that door for anyone. So I do like that, and I think the writing definitely seems like it might be like the strongest element. I just hope like the story and maybe some of the other characters, maybe the characters with the stories don't let it down for the most part.
Right.
That's kind of like my fear, but I'm optimistic about this one, personally. Do you want to talk about the next trailer?
Okay, so the next trailer is They Shall Come. Okay, so this film was written by Chris Morris and Jesse Armstrong. Chris Morris was the director of the film Double Black in 2013. Jesse Armstrong was the writer of... I was actually shocked to see this, but My Parents Are Aliens back in 2000. So I was actually quite shocked. Actually.
Oh, really?
I was like, oh, when I was looking through to do some research, I was like, oh, wow.
That's a step up.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. And it was Black Mirror as well, wasn't it? Yeah.
That he wrote for?
Yeah, that's correct, isn't it?
He might have done something.
Maybe
like,
some
he might
episodes?
have directed or something like that.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just want to make sure. I was quite shocked to see the singer and actress Anna Kendrick, who stars in a film she played in last year, A Simple Favor, which was actually a very good film. I really enjoyed that film. So going into the plot, so the film is about an impoverished preacher that is trying to support the Miami projects and trying to get some money to help his family from getting evicted, and his sponsor is actually an FBI worker who's tricking him into becoming like a criminal by filling his mindset with revolutionary dreams. So that's the synopsis of the film.
You don't really get that from the trailer.
No, you don't.
You kind of just... Because the way I saw it was like, oh, it was like some alt-right-ish cult leader, and he like wants more power and he wants to get his point across, and the FBI is like, oh, we got to do something about this guy before he does. I don't know if the trailer was intentionally edited that way, but it doesn't... I mean, yeah, I know we've just kind of praised the Lighthouse for not spoiling a lot and not really giving the story, but I think at least with the Lighthouse we can kind of piece together some kind of idea. With this, I found it really hard to like even know what the hell was going on. I got confused because I was like, what's going on? But it looks interesting for a concept. It could work. I mean, Chris Morris is a guy who I do enjoy a lot of his work. He obviously did the film Four Lions, which is essentially about a group of like Muslim or Islamic guys who essentially want to be suicide terrorist bombers. That's the kind of stuff he makes, as well as shows like Brass Eye, which is essentially a parody on it's kind of like a parody on kind of like those like watchdog like shows that kind of talk about like issues and problems in like the United Kingdom and stuff like that, as well as he did a really kind of postmodernist kind of horror scary show kind of comedy called Jam. Yeah, it's called Jam, and that's a really weird stuff. So his stuff is really weird, and kind of people kind of consider him to be a controversial maker. So it kind of makes sense that he'd kind of be tapping into more of this kind of paranoia to do with like you know, cult leaders and revolutionaries. So I hope that he does explore that kind of stuff. I also kind of hope that we kind of see both sides of like, you know, this leader of this cult as well as the FBI's paranoia. I kind of hope that we get, you know, some kind of reference to that, because the FBI is just paranoid all the time, simply put. And cult leaders think they know everything. Granted, he's not the case where he thinks he knows everything, but obviously his mind and, you know, he's kind of getting like a power corruption essentially, which is interesting. I kind of hope that they do reference these kinds of things in the film, because it could be a good film. It's a British film, so no one's going to watch it, which is a shame, because England hardly has a film industry now, which is a shame. So that's kind of why people have been screaming about this film, because it's like whenever England makes like a film, everyone's like, oh my god, England made a film.
Yeah.
And even then, it's like, it's very strange to see like Anna Kendrick in this, because I was like shocked to see her. I was like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I was shocked as well.
So it's like a British funded film. What are you doing here? Get out of here. You know, but I'm looking forward to any other things to say about this film, because there isn't too much really.
No, I mean, I felt like the trailer looked quite funny, to be fair.
It looks like it could be like one, not like a laugh out loud, like I'm laughing all the time kind of, but it looks like it's going to be like a smartly written kind of
I feel like it is going to be one of those films, and I feel like Anna Kendrick did a good job of acting in the trailer as well.
Oh yeah, being like a self-indulgent, like, I guess, brat to some extent, you know, I think she plays that kind of well, because I think the whole point of why she's doing this is because she wants to impress her boss. Right, yeah. That's why she's doing that. So obviously she's just acting like a stuck-up, greedy woman, basically. So I think she's kind of playing that pretty well. Yeah, I'm optimistic about this one. Hopefully, well, we should get a release. It's America that probably won't get a release of this one.
Probably, yeah.
Although Anna Kendrick might be there to obviously maybe help the film get a little bit more traction. So that's good. Who knows, yeah. You have the next trailer as well.
Yeah, so The Irishman. Basically, this is an American biological crime drama directed by, forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce the second name, but Martin, I think it's... Scorsese, thank you. He also worked on Goodfellas in 1990, and this film's also written by Stephen, and I can't pronounce the second name. I don't even want to say it because I feel like I'm going to say it wrong. I'm going to try. I think it's Zillion, I think, or something like that. But forgive me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Who worked on American Gangster in 2007. And the famous actors returning, Robert De Niro, who is in Bronx Tale, and Al Pacino in Godfather. Mm-hmm. So the film storyline is based off a man called Frank Sheeran, who was a mob hitman and a World War II veteran, who develops his skills during his service in Italy. Now being older, he reflects on his past events that's defined his career as a hitman. So my thoughts and opinions on this trailer. The film looks very interesting since it's a biopic, so it's based on a person, true events. I feel like the film probably... These films do quite well, depending on the writers and the producers who are behind the idea.
Yeah.
And how they... I'm trying to think of the word. How they execute it. And I feel like the acting was on point. And it's great to see Al Pacino and Robert De Niro return. And it's a long time since this kind of genre's come out, I feel like.
Yeah, we don't get films like this a lot.
Yeah, we don't.
And I think the reason why a lot of people are talking about this film is obviously it's Martin Scorsese, who obviously done so many films like this, and you got, Al Pacino and these guys who are pretty much in these films. They're kind of, when you think of these guys, you think of those films like Godfather, like Goodfellas, that kind of stuff. So it is a big deal to kind of see this mass collection, and also... as a lot of people kind of talking about, it's going to be on Netflix, which is a big deal as well, I guess, because you got, big Hollywood filmmaker Martin Scorsese on Netflix, which, whatever. I mean, Netflix just bought the film, they didn't fund it. But it is interesting. I really like the editing in this trailer. For the most part, I liked how it had like such a punch to it. Yeah. Like almost every like crucial like not every moment, but like there's a lot of moments where they had like an extra like kind of like music kick or an extra like oomph to like emphasize it, like particularly that point where he just walks into that place and just like throws the guy out the window and then shoots him, and it's like that actually they added extra like just to give you that kind of stuff to it. And even like what you were saying, definitely all three guys, all the actors definitely seem to be like kind of in their like prime. They're in their element with this. They know what they're doing, and it's good. The only thing I would say, which I didn't really like about it too much, is some of the like CGI on their faces, because obviously they don't look this young anymore.
Yeah. So I did notice that as well.
It's a shame because it's already distracting in the trailer.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you could have done about this. Maybe maybe makeup would have been a better option, but it looks really bad to me. And so sometimes it's fine, but when it's like really close up shots and stuff like that, or it's like really supposed to be looking at the face, it just
kind of obvious.
It's very obvious, which is a shame because I have a feeling that might actually let the film down, simply put. But maybe just don't make your film as accurate. I mean, maybe get younger actors to some extent.
But you know what? At least it ain't as bad as the cats.
No, it's not. It's not. So that's a very good point now. And yeah, I think that brings us to our last trailer, which is also possibly our weirdest one, technically.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah.
So we have Los Reyes, I believe that's how you say it. And this is essentially a documentary that essentially centers around two homeless dogs that are essentially observing the lives of teenagers in a skate park. And the trailer doesn't really give you too much. It kind of says like, oh, it's about these dogs and that, but it's honestly a pretty cool premise to do a documentary, especially if it's one where it's just a camera crew or just going to a skate park and just kind of listening in on these teenagers in their world while you have like just dogs there that are kind of like a part of this world. And I think it's interesting because neither the teens nor the dogs understand what's going on in each other's world. Yeah. Yet they're aware of each other and their presence, which is an interesting kind of like contrast when you think about it, because they're both so important to each other's lives, but at the same time they also kind of mean nothing. Right. So it's an interesting way to do things for the most part. It honestly makes me wonder who the main character of this film is. Is it the dogs or is it the teenagers? Yeah. I mean, maybe that's the point of the film. Maybe that's the question that the film is asking, like, who's the real star of this film? It's interesting. I mean, the dogs are cute themselves, but they definitely look, they do look like rough dogs. They do look like they're homeless, which is interesting.
I think they actually are. They're stray dogs.
Yeah, they are stray dogs. I think one's called Football, one's called Chloe.
Yeah.
Which is interesting names. But and it's kind of nice it's interesting because you get like these really lovely, clean like shots of like them, against like the backdrop of the city and stuff like that, and just the dogs sitting there not really doing anything, just sitting there, and you get all that. You basically see their innocence in this world, next to like people talking about like, oh, my girlfriend said she doesn't want to be with me anymore. So it's really odd, but hopefully it works. I've heard good things about it. But yeah, if you want to do something new and interesting, there's definitely one way to do it, I guess. Yeah. Any other thoughts you have about this trailer?
Not really. I've pretty much everything you said on the trailer. But I was just going to say, when I first watched it, I was so baffled. Yeah. I was just like, well, okay, two dogs, all right. And then there's people talking in the background. I was like, okay, why is it like this exactly? I had no idea. But then I had to do some reading up about it, and definitely gave me a different perspective of like the whole documentary itself. So obviously it being about two stray dogs who've made their actual home in the skate park. And then it's like about teenagers talking about their stories and coming from different backgrounds. And I remember in the trailer where the teenager was talking about like his mum's boyfriend being like a Star Wars geek or something like that. Yeah. And it was just interesting. Yeah, it doesn't even seem like it's like all that dramatic or all that serious to some extent. It's just all teenagers, different stories and what they're talking about and stuff like that. So it's interesting. It is really interesting. I hope we get like a wider release of this film somewhere, because I know I remember when I was looking at some images of it. I know there was somewhere they're doing a red carpet event for it. They're doing a red carpet event of it for like support dogs as well. Oh, wow. Which is quite nice. That's nice. So that was kind of cool. And it's an interesting. I really wanted to end with this because it's actually really nice. This concept simply, but I know most people love dogs.
like almost everyone loves dogs to the most part. You only got to put a dog, you know, as you've pretty much stated with like the Blair Witch in the comments, people saying if that dog gets hurt,
Yeah.
you know, I'm gonna break someone, you know.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, and yeah, definitely want to leave that trailer because not a lot of people talking about it, but I think it's worth talking about, especially compared to a lot of rubbish.
Yeah.
That's
The cats.
happened. Yeah. We're just gonna keep talking about that until that film comes out. But can you blame us? I think that's pretty much going to wrap up our podcast. We got the video of the episode, which is actually going to be titled Carried Away, which is one of the episodes from the Mickey Mouse short series I watched. And as great as this episode is, and I know you've seen it, and obviously it's a very simple premise of Mickey and Minnie going on a lovely, nice boat ride down the stream, which obviously takes a very interesting turn. The reason I wanted to bring this episode and make it the video episode is not only is the song that Minnie Mouse sings really lovely, not only is everything I've said about the show so fantastic, is because I also wanted to mention that the voice actress for Minnie Mouse unfortunately passed away right after this episode came out, Russie Taylor. She has essentially been voicing Minnie Mouse since 1990.
Oh, wow.
So she was pretty much the voice of Minnie Mouse for a long time. So she's unfortunately passed away. So this might be one of her last performances as Minnie Mouse, or other voices, because she's done many other voices, but that's one that she's kind of known for. And another fun fact I'll kind of end this podcast with is you should also go watch this animation because I think it's great as well.
Yeah, it's funny.
Is her husband, which I can't remember her name, Wayne. But yeah, I believe his name was Wayne. Her husband also voiced Mickey Mouse from 1977 to 2009.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, at some point, both the voice actors for Mickey and Minnie Mouse were married.
Oh.
So yeah, so I wanted to end with that because it's kind of sweet, but it's also kind of sad at the same time. So hopefully you enjoy the animation. Definitely go and watch the rest of the series. Watch like a shorter day, because it's like it'll take you like 3 minutes to watch an episode. But yeah, I wanted to end on that. Anything else you want to add to this podcast before we wrap it up?
Oh, no, that's it. I think I'm good.
Okay, I think that's been pretty good. We talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about cats again.
Yep.
And the horrors that is cats. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to this podcast. I guess I'll thank you once again, Al, for being on this podcast. It has been awesome, even in the midst of all this heat and all this craziness in the world. It's been great to kind of talk about some great stuff for once, because I feel last podcast we talked about some pretty bad stuff.
Yes.
But I think on this podcast we were pretty much like, yeah, almost everything's good.
Yeah.
So that's always a good thing when you come out going, yeah, I feel pretty pumped.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing to say is I'll end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the younger raccoon.
I'm the indigenous owl.
And we will see you on the next podcast.